Let me begin. Let me begin by saying thank you and welcome everybody to today's quarterly webinar delivered by Wellbeing People. And I'm very excited to be delivering this webinar today. I get a chance to collaborate with someone that's very important with me today. So I'm delighted about that. And I'm also delighted that many of you have decided to prioritize your well-being, prioritize your valuable time and join today's webinar. So today we're going to be really focusing in. We're going to take a little bit of a dive into understanding a little bit more around how we can raise awareness around some of the characteristics of worry and how to proactively, I guess, approach it as well and interrupt it and develop and build our mental fitness. Without further ado, what I'd like to do is to invite our guest speaker to come on to the screen here. Gary, are you there? Gary's, well, a more formal introduction would be that Gary is an associate or assistant professor at the Nottingham University and is a cognitive behaviour therapist and supervisor. And that's his more formal introduction. In a more informal introduction, of course, Gary's my little brother, will always be my little brother. So welcome, Gary. Thank you so much for popping in today. How are you today?
Yeah, good. Enjoying the sun. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Nice one. Well, as I said, we've got perhaps a short period of time to get through quite a lot. We're going to be discussing what worry actually is. We're going to look at pausing and reflecting and understanding a little bit what that really means for us and noticing some of our signs and symptoms. And we're going to perhaps share some strategies and tools for people to move forward with today. So I guess my first question I have is, it's important that we start at the beginning, I guess, right? So what constitutes worry, Gary? And because often it's synonymous with other things like anxiety and things like that. So if you could start just by explaining to people what constitutes worry, what constitutes anxiety.
Yeah, thank you. It's one of those things, isn't it, that sort of, as a term, I think is used interchangeably. So I think it's used very much around an emotion, So when someone says, "Oh, I'm feeling worried," that's the language that we use, isn't it? And everybody kind of knows really what that means, because everybody experiences worry. I suppose when you start to think about things and explore things further, distinguishing the process of worry is really helpful, because I suppose when we try to make sense of worry, worry tends to be less of an emotion and more of a kind of what we refer to as a cognitive process. So it's a kind of thinking process, very similar to, I suppose it's bedfellow of rumination. So you may have heard of rumination or not, and that's kind of mulling things over. So I suppose that's a cognitive process as well. So the two kind of go hand in hand, really. So in terms of sort of what worry is a thinking process that I suppose tends to be, when it becomes problematic, kind of excessive and a bit uncontrollable. And usually when we worry about lots of different types of things as well. And I suppose usually when we worry, the worry is quite future focused. So we tend to sort of start to think about things that could happen. So hypothetical scenarios that may happen in the future, as opposed to sort of rumination, really, which is more a kind of mulling things over sort of past events. But I suppose both of those cognitive or thinking processes are really important, because as a result of those processes, we feel things, usually aversive emotions such as anxiety, or kind of embarrassment or fear or guilt or shame. So usually as a result of those thinking processes, that generates an emotional response, and that's an important distinction.
And because it's often, you know, when I reflect around it, I get those, because sometimes I would say that certainly the people that I work with closely would say that sometimes I'm a bit of a worry and over worry things. I certainly feel like at one point I suffered from kind of performance anxiety, especially public speaking, and I was often, so am I feeling worried, or am I feeling anxious? You know, what's the key difference? So anxiety then seems like more of an emotion. We experience different emotions, and it's, I guess, important to have a rich, full and meaningful life where we do experience all of those different emotions.
Yeah, 100%. I suppose, you know, when we think about trying to distinguish between worry and anxiety, for example, I mean, anxiety actually falls under the umbrella of a complex emotion, because there's sort of there's a physiological component to anxiety. So we feel it in our bodies, don't we? The emotional kind of anxious response, and that's slightly different from something like a kind of a primary emotion, like fear or happiness or disgust or sadness. So those emotions tend to be they don't have any kind of conscious element to them. They're sort of hangovers from caveman times, whereas anxiety has a sort of a slightly different layer to it, because there could be either an appraisal, a sort of a meaning making element to it before we feel anxious, and certainly there's a physiological component to it. And I suppose thinking about kind of worry specifically, worry tends to be, I suppose most people tend to experience worry when they're entering into sort of novel situations, or situations which are kind of new or uncertain or unpredictable.
Mm.
So there's usually sort of, I suppose, situations which can contribute to triggering quite a lot of worrying. And that those situations trigger the worry, which then makes us feel usually anxious. As a result of that, we then usually either tend to feel quite tired and exhausted and fatigued, or sort of demoralized, really. So it has a kind of, it has a impact on us, particularly excessive and kind of uncontrollable worry.
Mm. So is it useful then, do you think, to normalize worry, because it's something that we would experience on a day-to-day kind of basis, I guess, at you know, this much or this much? Is it something to normalize? Is it useful to do that?
Yeah, it's a good, I mean, it's a good question. I think I suppose all kind of characteristics of mental health symptoms are important to kind of normalize, and I think the best thing to think about in terms of worry is to put it on a bit of a continuum, Grant. So and the same with fear. You know, when we work with people with specific phobias or like panic attacks and things like that, you know, the aim is not to extinguish or get rid of the fear. And in the same way, the aim is not to extinguish or get rid of worry, because I mean, it's impossible, but it's completely futile to try to attempt to get someone to not worry. And so if you drew out a continuum, Grant, you know, 0 to 100, 0 is no worry at all, and you know, 100 is excessive and uncontrollable worrying all the time. Then I suppose people that relate to kind of, you know, that as a characteristic of themselves might be at the upper end of the continuum. And I suppose, you know, what we want to do is to try and generate a little bit of flexibility in that continuum by kind of looking at how we might scrutinize our worries and start to I suppose take a little bit more control. And through learning sort of strategies and skills, and by doing that, we only need to get someone who's sort of 70-80% worrying down to sort of 40-50%. So yeah, I mean, everybody worries, and I suppose the fundamental characteristic when we're thinking about worry is that like the fuel that kind of keeps worry going, Grant, is uncertainty. So and lots of your participants here may well relate to this. So I suppose when we enter into situations that, again, are new or novel or unpredictable or uncertain, that can generate a sense of uncertainty. And typically people that kind of tend to worry quite a lot, they find it quite difficult to tolerate uncertainty. So as a kind of psychological theme, that becomes the kind of fuel that starts to contribute our way of thinking. So our thinking then starts to come into like typically kind of what if. So it's a kind of worry if you can start put what if in front of it. What if this happens? What if I embarrass myself today? What if I say something silly? What if I can't remember what to say? Or all of that kind of stuff. So you tend to start thinking what ifs, and that then starts to form these sort of worry chains, really.
And I guess then a question that jumped into my brain then instantly was, okay, can you suppress those thoughts then when they jump into your brain?
Well, you can, and we do. Whether or not that's helpful or not is another question. And I suppose that's rhetorical, because the answer to that is no, it's not helpful. It's not helpful at all to start suppressing our kind of worries. And there's ways in which we can illustrate that. So there's a sort of thought experiment that's a classic example of how.
Yeah, and we did this because everyone listening. Gary was kind enough to help support our wellbeing ambassadors and do a similar, and I think you're going the same place with the thought experiment. So yeah, it's a really, really lovely thought. Should we invite everybody to do that thought experiment now, Gary? See how we go.
Well, yeah. I mean, it will give me an opportunity to bring in my GCSE drama. So
go for it.
Okay. So roll with me here, folks. Yeah, we'll. I'm not sure how it will translate. I mean, it's usually a one-to-one kind of exercise, really. So so this is something called the polar bear experiment. So some of you may or may not have heard this, and it's a thought experiment. So what I'm going to ask all of you to do in a moment is very simple. I'm going to ask you to, wherever you are, just close your eyes, and I want you to think about anything you want to at all, anything in the world. Okay. And I'm just going to time you for 1 minute. Okay, so that's pretty simple, isn't it? So you can think about, what you're going to have for lunch, or what you're doing this evening or this weekend, or films, or hobbies or interests, anything at all. Okay. There's just one thing that I'm going to ask you not to think about. Okay, so I'm just going to bring a chair here, and I'm just bringing in now a friend of mine, which is this massive polar bear. Okay, so I want you to think about in a moment anything you want to, anything in the world apart from this polar bear. I don't want you to think about its teeth. I don't want you to think about its shimmering fur. I don't want you to think about his talons, and least of all, I don't want you to think about what the hell a polar bear is doing in my office in Nottingham. But literally anything else in the world you can think of, go ahead. Okay, so that's pretty clear. And I suppose what would happen now is that, and we can still follow this process, but as you're doing it, as I'm timing you, if an image or a thought or a picture of a bear or a polar bear pops into your mind, just go with it and just put your hand up. I mean, even though we can't see you all, and then because you're thinking about literally everything else in the world, put your hands down. I mean, there's a sharp audience here. And if it pops back into your mind again, just put your hand up again. And so on and so forth. But of course, that won't happen because you can think of literally anything else in the world. Okay, so if we're all clear, I'm just gonna, I'll go quiet for a minute, and I just want you to focus in on anything else apart from, you know, my friend here. Okay, and go. Okay, let's stop that there. Well done, everyone. What happened?
I noticed, I don't know if you did, Gary, the non-stop raised the hands.
Yeah, it sort of went up and down, didn't it?
It
yeah, it kept coming back. Okay. Okay. So yeah. So what typically happens in that scenario is that sort of most people start to sort of think about something else, and then like an irritating sort of intrusive thought of a bear, or even like a picture or an image comes into your mind. And so I suppose you know, I suppose it's important now to say, you know, why would we do that? And so this is based on a set of quite famous experiments, really, of in the late 70s, and that really those cognitive scientists were starting to think about, well, what happens when we try hard not to think about something? Yeah, because if you think about, if you replace the polar bear with like a distressing thought, or like an image, something that causes an aversive emotion, usually anxiety, then like it's completely reasonable and understandable, isn't it, that people don't want to feel that way, so they try to test or avoid the thought coming into their mind. So what this experiment highlighted was that that actually like a number of things happen. So you know, you're ahead of me here, everybody, but you know, they found a paradoxical sort of effect. So the harder I try not to think about something, the more I think about it. Okay. So that happens because I suppose when we single out that particular thought above all other thoughts, we enhance the effect of that thought above all of the other thoughts and images and pictures that we're experiencing. So there you have this sort of enhanced effect. The second thing that happens is like you tend to get a rebound effect, which some people have commented on, where you know, it sort of pops into your mind uncontrollably. So I must apologize, because you know, later on this evening you might have an image or a picture of a polar bear sort of popping into your mind when you're tucking into your tea. So why is that important? I suppose, it's important because it's sort of futile to start trying to suppress or avoid distressing worries, because all that's happening really is that you're placing more importance on that particular arbitrary thought above all other thoughts in your mind, and that is doing the opposite of what you're wanting or trying to do.
Nice one.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does. Did everyone explore that experiment and join in that experiment? I know many of you had certain responses to the experiment, which was wonderful. So yeah, many of us explored that experiment. I mean, it makes complete sense when you break it down and kind of look at it from slightly different angles. But I guess the next step, and I want to kind of journey through the plan today, Gary. The next step is perhaps to notice and be a little bit more self-aware. I notice all the way, just to acknowledge everybody that there are a few questions that we'll bounce through. We'll try and explore those at the end of the session today. But when it comes to awareness then and building awareness, it's important that we kind of reflect around some of our own signs and symptoms. So let me ask everyone that's joining us today for this session, what are some of your own signs and symptoms of worry? How do you know when you're worrying? Feel free to share your reflections in that webinar chat function as well.
I also noticed, just as responses are coming in, that someone said about worry and problem solving. And I suppose one of the things that keeps worry going, and this is really important, is that most people tend to associate worrying with positive things. Like, worry helps. I don't know if you have deadlines or stuff like that. So you kind of, worry helps motivate me to complete deadlines, or worry helps me prepare. Worry shows that I'm a caring person. Those kind, if I worry a lot, then like if bad things, negative things happen, then I'll be more prepared to kind of deal with them should they happen. So we have, it's wrapped up in a lot of beliefs that we hold, quite deeply about worry being helpful. And I suppose, I know that but just fundamentally, some questions to ask about that really can be quite helpful. So I suppose in the same way that we might think about like past events, you might ask someone about, can you change something that's already happened? No, you can't, because it's already happened. So if we're mulling over and ruminating stuff that's already happened, we can't change the outcome of that. And in a similar way with worry, can we change something that is future focused and hasn't happened yet? No, because it hasn't happened yet. So if you start to scrutinize the processes of rumination and worry, you begin to sort of think, well, actually, they're futile. All they do is contribute to aversive emotion, so making us feel bad. Getting people to accept that and then start to, develop alternative ways to respond is a much harder thing.
Yeah, it was lovely. Someone's just written in the chat, if problems could be solved, I would not need to worry. Just a nice little reflection. So yeah, driving our awareness, of course, is that first step, isn't it, to any kind of a change that we want to apply. And there were many kind of reflective answers there about their signs and symptoms, many of which kind of we might notice and perhaps have the same answers if we said, what are some of the signs and symptoms of anxiety as well? So yes, lovely. Do you have any reflections about that, Gary?
Yeah, I suppose perhaps another way of thinking about it is, how does worry manifest in terms of our behavior? So how do we show it? you know, and that's really important because you know, those are ways in which we can start to do something about very quickly. So typically, you know, if I'm worrying, there'll be like usually a list of sort of behaviors that I'll be doing. Top of the list is usually always avoiding stuff. So there's usually quite a lot of avoidance and things like procrastination. So sort of that just means sort of putting stuff off that I could do now because it makes me a bit anxious to the thought of starting it now. Yeah, procrastination. Over planning, over preparation. Who can't relate to these kind of things, right? Double checking, checking the internet, you know, needing all the information to make a decision making sometimes can be impulsive. Sometimes we can be paralyzed with not being able to make decisions, feeling overprotective of other people. I mean, you know, the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are some of the behaviors that people might. So then if we were to encourage people, what sort of things can they do, or what sort of things do they do then? So to change your reflection about the signs and symptoms now, let me ask a slightly different question, those people that are attending. What is it that you do then to currently help you manage your worry? What are the winning activities or actions that you employ that you feel really help manage, and as Gary was mentioning earlier on, that continuum bring you from an 80 down to a 70? What are some of the really great things that you do?
Yeah, really, really helpful. Yeah, lists.
I was drawn to that straight away. Love a list.
Yeah, I suppose in terms of all of these kind of responses, you know, many of those are kind of really helpful and really good to have in your toolkit. I suppose when we're thinking about things like avoiding stuff because it makes me feel, because I worry about it and it makes me feel anxious, or sort of putting stuff off, we need to sort of take a step back and think about, well, the underlying driver to that is that like I feel that I can't tolerate the uncertainty of it. So a lot of my behaviors tend to be about trying to increase certainty, you know? So, you know, things like only going to the same restaurant and only choosing from the same menu and choosing the same, you know, because even as subtle as that, you know, are ways in which sort of people might sort of try to increase certainty. But really it's about control, you know, like the flip side of that is I need to be more in control to reduce the amount of uncertainty around. And so much of the kind of focus of working with worry is about, I suppose, identifying things that feel worrisome to you and identifying sort of your kind of behaviors of how you would respond to that, and then purposefully sort of entering into situations that are new or novel, uncertain, unpredictable, and just not engaging in that particular strategy of behavior, and trying to sort of get better at tolerating the uncertainty. Yeah. Because fundamentally, you know, it's futile to try and control everything, life. You know, so you and I could set up and say, right, we're going to set up an experiment later on today, and we could look at, you know, 1,000 possible alternative scenarios that could occur on that one scenario, that one situation, that one experiment. And then it happens, and then something happens that neither of us thought about, and life just, you know, so it's just futile. We can't control everything. So the focus of working around tackling worry tends to be about getting better at tolerating uncertainty rather than focusing on what can we control, increasing things that we can control, because most things we can't control.
Yeah. So it's not about removing ourselves from those moments. It's about gradually exposing ourselves to deal with those worries, and that's why I guess I've become better at managing my performance anxiety over time, because I've learned to tolerate the uncertainty better by probably applying much more useful and helpful and healthy strategies than I did at the beginning of that.
Grant, we all have our own toolkits, and I suppose depending on what's at stake, we might always revert back to these more unhelpful behaviors and strategies, because it's just too risky. It's too risky to to not prepare for to teach a class next week, because of all that's at stake. So I might revert back to sort of planning and preparing. But I suppose, one of the things that we want to do is just acknowledge that there are some practical strategies that we can add to our toolkit, and just fundamentally sort of understand that it's a work in progress. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm working on it. Like I have some standard responses that I'll always do, and I know I'll always do them because it's too risky for me not to. But one thing is about recognizing, I know that I'm doing it, and the other thing is that sometimes I get better at not responding that way, because I recognize it and I can choose a different way to respond. Not all the time, but sometimes. Yeah. And it just becomes a work in progress.
Yeah. I love that. It is, isn't it? I guess everything is to a large degree. And with that in said, we like to kind of draw people's attention in at the end of a webinar or workshop or any kind of training or delivery, and invite people to experiment. And one of the things we were talking about was something called worry time, as perhaps a nice proactive approach to helping people interrupt their worry and manage it a little bit more effectively, so it doesn't overrun them. Do you want to share just a reflection around worry time and invite people to experiment with that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, worry time could be really, really helpful. It's a bit threatening and quite scary, but it can be a very helpful intervention, really. And it's really about postponing worry. That's really what worry time is. And I suppose it's building on other sort of practical strategies. So there's something called the worry tree as well, which is where, quite a useful sort of way of structuring and scrutinizing our worries. So, is this a hypothetical worry, or is this a current problem? If it's hypothetical, I can't do anything about it. If it's a current problem, I can. And it's a sort of problem solving strategy of how we might scrutinize and deal with worry. So, we might sort of introduce that as a sort of strategy or a technique initially. And then I suppose, in terms of sort of worry time, it's very simple. So we might encourage an individual to set aside some protected time to just worry. And I know that sounds a bit odd given all that we've said today, but 10, 15, 20 minutes in the morning, perhaps 10, 15 minutes in the evening. So we've got two periods of worry time, and during that time we would negotiate, right, well, where are you going to be worrying? So you don't want to sort of worry like in a place, your favorite armchair, or like in a place that you spend a lot of time, your bedroom or anything like that, where you spend a lot of time. If you've got a spare room, or some people do it at the bottom of the stairs, or so a place where you sort of don't spend that much time, because that can be quite helpful. And then you simply time how long you're going to worry for. And you can keep a log, keep a track of the things that you're worrying about. But the key here is the time in between the worry time. And so because worry is so threatening for people because of how it makes us feel, just dismissing worry doesn't work. I mean, how many times have you been worrying and someone said, oh, don't worry about it? It's like, oh, right, yeah, no, of course. Silly me, like, oh yeah, no, that's fine now. You know, I'm just not worrying about it. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, but so this basic strategy gives us an opportunity to sort of in between those worry times. If we do recognize and notice a worry, it pops into our mind, to say, I can't really attend to that now. I might jot it down, like make a note of what the worry is, and then I'll postpone that to this evening at my worry time after the kids are in bed and I've got 10 minutes to myself. So, and you'll be amazed at just how sort of helpful that strategy can be and how many opportunities it generates for people to learn things. So, for example, without doing that, if I had like a meeting with my boss this afternoon, I might typically be worrying about that all day. And then like 30 minutes before the meeting's due, the boss emails and sort of cancels and reschedules it for next Wednesday. And so like, I was like, well, I needn't have spent those hours sort of worrying about it. And so typically what happens is, you know, it generates opportunities for people to feel more in control and to start, postponing their worry because they are attending to it. It's just, I've got stuff to do that I want to be getting on with first. I'll attend to you later. You know, later.
Lovely. I'm conscious of time because as per normal, when we get together, Gary, we end up yapping for ages. And apologies that we've overrun everybody. If you do need to jump off the call, we completely understand, of course. I'm just going to launch the feedback poll. Hold on one second. Let's end that one and launch that one. What you all would have noticed, hopefully, is that in the chat function, I've dropped a poster. And the poster is a PDF poster that we created here to invite people to reflect around the proactive approach of worry time and to utilize the worry tree that Gary mentioned as well. So please feel free to follow that link and download that, utilize that as a poster. You can stick it up in those kind of high footfall areas within your business and see how we go. Now, what I'd really like to do just for the last few minutes, Gary, is try and kind of, because we've had a few questions jump in, of course, as you can all well imagine. And some of the questions are really interesting that we've had here. Can you be a natural warrior was a question that someone asked earlier on. If you were to give as quick an answer as it deserves, I guess, Gary, what are your reflections around that? Can you be a natural warrior?
Well, my first reflections are, what does that mean to you? You know, what does that mean to the person? What does a natural warrior? But I think that individual is, you know, picking up on something that is quite characteristic, which is that warriors tend to be warriors since they were young. So most people that worry a lot, if you ask them, you know, is this something that sort of just started recently as a result of what's going on, or most people would say no. As a child, I sort of tended to feel like things were uncertain and would worry a lot. So simply, I would probably say yes. You know, there is a natural element to that, and that's around our, you know, our predisposed, you know, personality and characterological things as well.
Nice. And it says, someone's dropped in another question here. How would you advise to cope with big worries? Is there anything that you change about your approach to big worries, whatever big worries is defined as?
I suppose recognizing how big worries impact upon you, and then recognizing what you would typically do in response to big worries, and then starting to look at are those responses like helpful? I mean, does over preparing for 5 hours the night before actually improve my performance the following day? Possibly, but how can I find out? So it's to start recognizing how that would manifest, and then could I alter how I would respond, and then see what happens. So sort of test it out. But most stuff with worry is about like procrastination and avoidance. So the simple response to most things is do stuff. Like just start, whatever it might be, action.
It's that intention action, isn't it? I've got great intentions, but without that action it just falls flat, doesn't it? And we need to develop that traction. So I guess my reflection would be to, although we've mentioned the worry tree and the worry time as something to experiment with, whatever fits with you, that's nice and simple for you to access, that's going to move you down that continuum a little bit, whatever that looks like, whatever that feels like for you, is what we would say here at Wellbeing People is a very useful 1% progress experiment to roll with, just to move ourselves just that 1% in the direction that we want to go. So yeah, develop that traction. I would say, and I do say, develop that traction by keeping it simple. So even on those days when we have those ups and downs, we can still access that simple action for us.
Because fundamentally, if I don't feel motivated to do something, I might not do it. But if I can push through that motivation, I might not enjoy starting the work project that I've been putting off. But the very nature of starting it and committing to the action, even though I didn't enjoy it, once I reflect back later on that day, that half an hour or that hour gives me a sense of achievement that I've done it. So I may not have enjoyed the exercise or the activity that I'm committing to, but I get a sense of achievement for having tried, which can increase your motivation. So. Absolutely.
So yeah, we call it 3 S's. Keep it nice and simple. If it's nice and simple, you're likely to experience more success. If you're likely to experience more success, it's likely to be more sustainable for us. So we think about those 3 S's all the time. I'm very conscious of time, and we've come up to 45 minutes. So my number one goal was not to overrun the time, which we did. So apologies everybody for that. Feel free to, again, remember this is being recorded, so this will be accessible as a resource within the Wellbeing People communities and on their YouTube channels as well. Feel free to connect with us here at Wellbeing People in both our communities in LinkedIn and on Facebook. And feel free to if you have any inquiries about the business or about Wellbeing People, feel free to email us at enquiries@wellbeingpeople.com. It just really remains for me to say, Gary, is there any final thoughts, any kind of things that you want to pass on just at the end of the session today?
Takeaway message, I suppose, worry is not an emotion, it's a thinking process. If it's a thinking process, like we learn it, and if something's learned, it can be unlearned.
There you go, in a nutshell, by Gary Payne. Fabulous. Yes, thank you so much, Gary. I find it really fascinating listening to you talk, and thank you so much for sharing your insight and your knowledge and your experience with such a diverse and challenging topic like worry. Thank you all so much for attending today's session. Again, please feel free to reach out and contact us if you need to, and we'll do our best to support you in any way we can. But thank you, everybody. Before you hop away, don't forget to jump on the feedback poll. It's very important for us. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along and attending. And again, thank you so much, Gary, for for sharing your reflections.
My pleasure.